The boardroom smells of leather and ambition. 20 floors above Chicago's financial district, where Marcus Kane has spent the last 3 hours listening to men in expensive suits dance around the truth. The Volkov shipment sits in a warehouse on the south side, waiting for his signature on documents that will never see a courtroom, that will transform illegitimate Huo into legitimate business with the stroke of a pen worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. His phone vibrates for the fourth time in 10 minutes, and he silences it without looking, his attention fixed on the lawyer across the mahogany table who's explaining risk mitigation strategies in language designed to obscure rather than clarify. Marcus has built his empire on understanding what people mean rather than what they say, on reading the spaces between words where truth hides from scrutiny. At 32, he's consolidated power that his father spent 40 years accumulating, streamlined operations that blend legitimate real estate development with shipping interests that don't bear close examination. The Romano family controls Chicago's West Side through a network of businesses and relationships that make Marcus simultaneously invisible and omnipresent, a ghost who signs checks and breaks bones with equal efficiency. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The meeting concludes with handshakes that seal agreements worth millions, and Marcus rides the elevator down alone, his reflection in the polished steel doors showing a man who looks like he belongs in boardrooms, not back alleys. His suit cost $4,000, his watch more than most cars, his shoes, Italian leather that's never touched anything dirtier than marble floors. But beneath the expensive camouflage, he carries the weight of a childhood spent in Bridgeport where survival meant learning to fight before learning to read, where his mother worked 3 jobs that still weren't enough to keep the lights on past January. He remembers hunger with the kind of clarity that never fades, remembers watching her count coins for bread while wearing the same coat for 5 winters until it fell apart in her hands. The September afternoon hits him when he exits the building, humidity thick enough to taste, the kind of heat that makes Chicago feel more like a sauna than a city. His driver waits at the curb with the black Mercedes that cost more than his mother made in 10 years, engine running to keep the interior cool, while homeless people sleep on grates 3 blocks away. Marcus is reaching for the door handle when he hears it, a sound so small it should be lost in the urban noise, in the construction and traffic, and thousands of people moving through downtown like blood through veins. But something about it cuts through everything else, registers as wrong in the part of his brain that's kept him alive through situations where wrong meant dead. Sir? The voice belongs to a child, barely louder than a whisper, coming from beside the concrete planter where corporate landscaping tries to soften steel and glass with decorative grasses that cost more to maintain than actual gardens. Marcus turns, his hand automatically moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Instincts honed through years of navigating betrayal, responding before conscious thought can intervene. A boy stands there, maybe 5 years old, with dark hair that needs cutting and brown eyes too large for his thin face. His clothes are clean but worn, jeans with patches on the knees and a t-shirt that's been washed so many times. The original color exists only as suggestion. His sneakers are held together with duct tape, silver strips wrapped around the soles where rubber has separated from fabric. The child looks up at Marcus with an expression that combines terror and desperate hope, like someone drowning who's just spotted a piece of driftwood that might keep them afloat for a few more minutes. His small hands are clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension, and Marcus can see him trembling despite the afternoon heat. "Mama won't wake up," the boy whispers, and the words land like punches, each syllable carrying weight that makes Marcus's chest tighten with something he doesn't immediately recognize as emotion because he's spent years training himself not to feel things that make you vulnerable, that give enemies leverage to exploit. Marcus glances at his driver, who's already out of the car, hand inside his jacket where his own weapon rests, scanning the street for threats because children don't approach Marcus Kane randomly, don't appear beside his car without raising red flags about setups and traps. The driver's eyes ask silent questions about what to do, whether to remove this interruption or wait for instructions. But Marcus can't look away from the boy's face, from the tear tracks cutting through dirt on his cheeks, from the way his whole body shakes like he's used up every ounce of courage just to approach a stranger. There's nothing calculated in this child's desperation, nothing that suggests orchestrated manipulation. This is pure terror given voice by someone too young to hide emotions behind the masks adults learn to wear. "Where's your mama?" Marcus asks, his voice coming out rougher than intended, the edge that usually makes grown men flinch now directed at a 5-year-old who deserves gentleness he's forgotten how to provide. The boy's lip trembles, and for a moment Marcus thinks he's going to cry, but instead he reaches out one small hand and grabs Marcus's wrist with surprising strength, fingers barely able to wrap halfway around, pulling with urgency that communicates more than words ever could about fear and need and time running out. "Home," the child says, tugging harder, trying to move Marcus's 200-pound frame through sheer force of will. "She won't wake up, and she's really hot, and I tried shaking her, but she won't open her eyes, and I don't know what to do. And Mrs. Garcia said you help people, and—" The words tumble out in a rush, panic making them run together until Marcus has to concentrate to separate them into coherent meaning. Mrs. Garcia. The name triggers recognition. Memory of an elderly woman who runs a community center in Pilsen, who's called him twice over the years, when neighborhood situations required intervention he could provide, but police couldn't or wouldn't. She's vouched for him to a desperate child, told this boy that Marcus Kane, who signs death warrants over morning coffee, could be trusted to help rather than harm. The responsibility of that trust settles over his shoulders like physical weight. Like armor he didn't ask to wear but can't refuse, without becoming someone his mother wouldn't recognize. Marcus looks at his driver again, sees understanding dawn in the man's expression. They've worked together for 6 years, long enough that words become unnecessary for basic communication. The driver nods slightly, acknowledgement that he'll handle the rescheduled meetings, the associates waiting for Marcus's arrival at the warehouse, all the business that suddenly feels less urgent than a child's trembling grip on his wrist. "Show me," Marcus says, and watches relief break across the boy's face like sunrise, terror easing slightly now that an adult has agreed to take responsibility, to carry the weight of whatever crisis awaits in a home where a mother won't wake up. The child leads him down the sidewalk with determined steps, his small hand still wrapped around Marcus's wrist, like he's afraid letting go means losing this chance, this miracle of help that appeared in expensive shoes and a suit that costs more than his family probably spends on rent. People move aside automatically when they see Marcus approaching, something in his bearing communicating authority that makes strangers create space without consciously understanding why. They walk 6 blocks, moving from the financial district into neighborhoods where glass towers give way to older buildings, where corporate chains become family-owned shops with signs in Spanish and Polish, where the smell of exhaust mixes with cooking odors from restaurants that serve communities rather than tourists. The boy navigates with the confidence of someone who knows these streets intimately, taking shortcuts through alleys and between buildings that Marcus's driver would never consider safe. But nothing happens. No ambush emerges from shadowed doorways. No threats materialize from the urban landscape that holds 1,000 places to hide. Just a child leading a stranger home because his mother won't wake up, because he's too young to handle crisis alone, because someone told him Marcus Kane fixes problems. They stop in front of a 3-story walk-up that's seen better. Decades. Brick facades stained with years of weather and neglect. Windows covered with bars that speak to neighborhood realities about break-ins and desperation. The boy pulls Marcus toward the entrance where the security door hangs broken, lock mechanism smashed months or years ago, and never repaired because landlords in these neighborhoods don't invest in buildings they're waiting to sell to developers who'll turn them into condos. The stairwell reeks of urine and mildew, walls covered in graffiti that ranges from artistic murals to crude tags marking territory. The boy climbs to the second floor without hesitation, his small legs taking stairs two at a time while Marcus follows, his mind already calculating scenarios, preparing for what he'll find when that apartment door opens. They stop at 2C, where paint peels from wood that's been patched and repainted so many times, the door's original color exists only in memory. The boy pulls out a key on a string around his neck, hands shaking so badly he can barely fit it into the lock, and Marcus reaches down gently, covering the small hands with his own, guiding the key home with steady pressure that makes the mechanism turn. The door swings open onto a studio apartment that measures maybe 400 square feet, every inch organized with desperate efficiency to maximize space that will never be enough. A kitchenette occupies one wall, dishes drying in a rack beside a sink that drips constantly. A table holds homework papers and crayons, and against the far wall, a bed pushed into the corner where a woman lies completely still. The smell hits Marcus before his eyes fully process the scene. Fever, sweat, and sickness. The sweet, sick odor of infection that's progressed beyond what home remedies can address. The woman's skin carries a grayish pallor visible even from the doorway, and he can hear her breathing from here. Shallow and labored, each inhale sounding like it costs more than she can afford to give. The boy runs to his mother's side immediately, small hands patting her face with increasing desperation. "Mama, I brought help. Mama, please wake up. Please, Mama." His voice cracks on the last word, terror that's been building all day finally breaking through whatever brave facade he's been maintaining. Marcus crosses the small space in 3 strides, his expensive shoes silent on linoleum that's been scrubbed clean, despite cracks where dirt accumulates permanently. He kneels beside the bed, pressing 2 fingers to the woman's neck, finding a pulse that flutters weak and rapid beneath skin that burns like fire against his touch. She's young, maybe 26 or 27, with features that would be pretty if they weren't carved with exhaustion and fever. Her dark hair is plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her lips carry a bluish tinge that makes Marcus's stomach clench with recognition of oxygen deprivation, of lungs struggling against infection that's reached the stage where minutes matter more than hours. He pulls out his phone, dialing 911 while his eyes scan the nightstand for medication bottles, for medical information that might tell paramedics about allergies or conditions. What he finds instead makes rage join the unfamiliar concern tightening his chest. Bills stamped with final notices, prescription bottles with dates months old, and instructions to complete full course that clearly weren't followed. A calendar showing multiple shift schedules color-coded in ways that mean this woman has been working herself to death trying to afford this decay-scented studio. "I need an ambulance at 847 West 18th Street, apartment 2C, Marcus says when the operator answers, his voice carrying the kind of authority that makes people respond immediately. Woman, late 20s, unconscious with high fever, labored breathing, possible pneumonia or sepsis. She needs transport now. The operator asks questions he answers with clinical precision, describing symptoms and vital signs while the boy clutches his mother's hand, whispering promises that everything will be okay in a voice that suggests he's been the adult in this relationship far longer than his 5 years should require. Marcus places a hand on the child's shoulder, the gesture foreign but somehow natural. "What's your name?" he asks gently, needing to call this boy something other than the generic terms that reduce people to categories, rather than individuals. "Daniel," the child whispers, not looking away from his mother's face. "Daniel Reyes. And Mama is Sophia." She works at 3 different places so we can have this apartment and so I can go to school and have food. And she never gets sick, except this time she did. And I thought she was just really tired from working late. But then this morning she wouldn't wake up even when I shook her really hard. The explanation pours out in a stream of consciousness that paints a picture Marcus understands too well, having lived a version of it himself before his father's death brought him into the family business, before criminal enterprise provided the kind of money that made survival stop being the daily equation determining every choice. The ambulance is coming, Marcus says, hearing sirens in the distance growing closer. Your mama is going to be okay. The doctors will help her. The paramedics arrive within 6 minutes, their practiced efficiency transforming the cramped studio into an emergency treatment center. They move with coordinated precision that speaks of countless similar calls, countless mothers who've worked themselves sick, countless children who've watched their only parent slip away into unconsciousness that might or might not be reversible. Marcus steps back to give them room, but Daniel refuses to release his grip on his mother's hand, small fingers wrapped around hers with desperate strength. One paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, kneels beside the boy with the patience of someone who's learned that rushing traumatized children only makes things worse. I'm Sarah, she says softly. I need you to let go of your mama's hand for just a minute so we can help her. Can you do that for me? Can you be brave a little longer? Daniel looks up at Marcus with eyes that ask silent questions about whether this is safe, whether letting go means losing her permanently. Marcus nods, something in his chest twisting at the realization that this child he met 15 minutes ago is looking to him for reassurance, for permission to trust these strangers who've invaded their small sanctuary. It's okay, Marcus says, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. They're going to make her better. But they need space to work. Daniel releases his mother's hand slowly, reluctantly, and Marcus finds himself pulling the boy against his side, one arm wrapping around small shoulders that tremble with the effort of not crying. The child's head barely reaches Marcus's ribs, and the weight of him feels simultaneously insignificant and monumental, like holding something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Severe pneumonia, possibly septic, the male paramedic announces to his partner, his voice carrying the careful neutrality healthcare workers adopt when situations are critical, but panic won't help. BP's low, heart rate elevated, temperature 104. We need to move fast. They insert an IV line with practiced efficiency, Sophia's arm revealing track marks from previous medical interventions and bruises in various stages of healing that speak of physical labor that breaks down bodies not designed for the kind of relentless work poverty demands. The oxygen mask comes next, then a rapid consultation about transport to Northwestern Memorial, rather than the closer facility that won't have the resources for what they suspect is systemic infection requiring aggressive intervention. Is there a father? Other family we should notify? Sarah asks, her eyes moving between Marcus's expensive suit and the apartment's obvious poverty, with barely concealed curiosity about his presence here. About why a man who clearly doesn't belong in this neighborhood is holding a terrified child like he has the right. Daniel shakes his head against Marcus's side, a tiny movement that communicates volumes about absence and abandonment. Just me and Mama, he whispers. Dad left before I was born. Grandma died last year. It's just us. The words carry acceptance of isolation that shouldn't exist in a 5-year-old's vocabulary, and Marcus feels rage ignite alongside the protectiveness that's been building since Daniel grabbed his wrist downtown. This child and his mother have been surviving alone in a city of 3 million people, working and struggling and barely hanging on while the world moved past them with indifference. I'm with them, Marcus says, the lie emerging smooth as glass despite its complete fabrication. He watches the paramedics exchange Glances that suggest they've heard similar stories countless times, that chosen family counts when blood family fails or never existed at all. They don't question his claim, too focused on stabilizing their patient for transport. The descent down the narrow stairwell with the stretcher requires careful maneuvering, the paramedics working in practiced tandem to navigate turns designed for people, not equipment. Marcus follows with Daniel in his arms now, the boy having wrapped himself around Marcus's torso like a vine seeking support, face buried against expensive fabric that probably costs more than everything in that apartment combined. The ambulance waits at the curb, back doors open to receive the stretcher that emerges moments later carrying Sophia, whose name Marcus has learned, but whose story remains mostly mystery. Daniel's grip tightens when he sees his mother being loaded into the vehicle, small body going rigid with renewed fear. "I'm riding with them," Marcus tells the paramedics, climbing into the ambulance before they can protest. Daniel still wrapped around him like he's grown roots into Marcus's ribcage. Sarah opens her mouth to object, probably about regulations regarding non-family members, but something in Marcus's expression makes her reconsider. She simply nods, securing the stretcher and signaling her partner to start moving. The doors slam shut. The siren begins its urgent wail, and Marcus finds himself in the back of an ambulance racing through Chicago's afternoon traffic, while holding a child who's somehow dismantled every defense he's spent 15 years constructing. The mechanical efficiency of his criminal life, the careful distance he maintains from anything resembling vulnerability, all of it crumbling under the weight of a 5-year-old who believes Marcus can fix this. The ride passes in a blur of medical jargon and monitoring equipment. Sophia's condition apparently stable enough for transport, but critical enough that the paramedics maintain constant vigilance over vitals that fluctuate with concerning irregularity. Daniel has released his death grip on Marcus's neck, but keeps one small hand fisted in his shirt, watching the medical team work with eyes that have seen too much for someone whose entire existence can be measured in 5 years. Marcus finds himself stroking the boy's hair automatically, the gesture foreign but somehow natural, and he wonders when exactly he became the kind of person who comforts traumatized children instead of being the source of trauma others flee from. His phone vibrates continuously in his pocket, associates wondering about missed meetings, business demanding attention. But he ignores it all because nothing in his carefully constructed empire feels more urgent than the small hand gripping his shirt. "What's her name?" he asks quietly, nodding toward Sophia, and Daniel's voice emerges small but clear in response. "Mama's name is Sophia Maria Reyes. She's 26. She works at a restaurant during lunch, cleans offices at night, and does laundry for people on weekends. She says we're going to save enough money for a real apartment someday, one with 2 bedrooms so I can have my own room and she can sleep without me kicking her." The child's matter-of-fact delivery of what is clearly a memorized dream guts Marcus more effectively than any violence he's experienced. "She makes really good tamales," Daniel continues, his voice gaining strength as he talks, as if speaking about his mother makes her more present, more real, less likely to slip away permanently. "And she sings to me before bed even when she's so tired she can barely stand up. She says singing is free and love is free, and we have more of both than people with all the money in the world." The simple philosophy, delivered in a child's voice, strikes Marcus with unexpected force. He thinks about his penthouse overlooking the lake, about the expensive emptiness he's filled with things that don't require emotional investment, about the years he's spent accumulating wealth while convincing himself that power and money equal success rather than just elaborate ways to avoid admitting loneliness. The ambulance pulls into Northwestern Memorial's emergency bay with a lurch that sends equipment rattling, and suddenly they're surrounded by a new team of medical professionals who descend on the stretcher with coordinated urgency. Marcus climbs out with Daniel in his arms, following the controlled chaos into the hospital's fluorescent brightness, where everything smells of antiseptic and desperate hope. He catches his reflection in glass doors that slide open automatically, a man in a blood-spotted $4,000 suit carrying a child whose shoes are held together with duct tape. Looking nothing like the enforcer who left a boardroom meeting hours ago and everything like someone whose entire world just shifted off its axis. The emergency room's intake coordinator appears with clipboard and questions, professional efficiency barely masking exhaustion that comes from processing too many emergencies with insufficient resources. Marcus provides what information he can fabricate, claiming to be a family friend who found Sophia unconscious, carefully omitting details about downtown encounters and children who walk blocks alone because they don't know who else to ask. When she reaches the section about insurance, he doesn't hesitate. "I'll handle all medical expenses personally," he says, his voice carrying the kind of authority that makes the coordinator's eyebrows rise slightly. "Whatever treatment she needs, whatever time in hospital is required, whatever medications or follow-up care, send the bills to my office." He pulls out a business card, one of the legitimate ones that list his real estate holdings and development companies, creating paper trail that will survive scrutiny if anyone questions his involvement. The coordinator accepts it with practiced neutrality, having probably seen stranger arrangements in this emergency room where crisis brings together people who never would have met otherwise. "There are forms," she begins, but Marcus is already taking them, settling into one of the plastic chairs with Daniel still clinging to him, and beginning to fill out paperwork that will create official fiction of relationship that doesn't exist beyond the fact that a desperate child grabbed his wrist and somehow became his responsibility. The waiting stretches into hours that feel suspended outside normal time. Daniel eventually falls asleep against Marcus's chest, exhaustion finally overwhelming adrenaline that's kept him functioning through crisis that would break adults. Marcus holds him carefully, one arm supporting the small body while his other hand works his phone, sending terse messages that postpone everything that can be postponed and delegate what can't. His second in command, Vincent, calls after the third rescheduled meeting, voice tight with concern that goes beyond business inconvenience. "Boss, what's going on? The Volkov people are getting nervous. The lawyers need your signature. Are you okay?" "I'm at Northwestern Memorial," Marcus says quietly, aware of Daniel sleeping and other people in the waiting room who don't need to hear details. "Personal situation. Handle the Volkov signing yourself. You have authorization to sign on my behalf for deals under $5 million. The lawyers know the drill." Silence on the other end, Vincent processing this unprecedented deviation from Marcus's usual hands-on approach to business. "Northwestern Memorial," he repeats slowly. "You sick? You need backup? You need anything?" The concern is genuine, earned through 6 years of working together, of Vincent proving himself trustworthy in situations where betrayal meant death. Marcus looks down at the sleeping child in his arms, at the small face that's finally relaxed in exhaustion, and feels something in his chest that he doesn't have words for yet. "I'm fine," he says, which isn't exactly a lie but isn't exactly truth either. "Just dealing with something unexpected. I'll brief you tomorrow on everything that needs attention." He ends the call before Vincent can ask more questions, before he has to explain decisions he doesn't fully understand himself. Around him, the emergency room cycles through its parade of human suffering: a teenager with a skateboarding injury, an elderly man clutching his chest, a woman with blood soaking through a towel wrapped around her hand. Lives intersecting with crisis in a space designed to catch people when they fall. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. A doctor finally emerges through the double doors 4 hours after their arrival, her scrubs wrinkled and coffee-stained, exhaustion shadowing features that suggest too many double shifts. She scans the waiting area, and when her eyes land on Marcus and the sleeping child, something in her expression softens with understanding that doesn't require explanation. Sophia Reyes? She asks, approaching with the deliberate walk of someone who's learned that delivering news requires careful calibration of tone and body language. Marcus nods, shifting Daniel carefully so he doesn't wake, and stands with the kind of controlled movement that suggests danger beneath expensive tailoring. The doctor's eyes track the motion, professional assessment taking in details that tell stories about violence and power, about men who move like predators even in hospital waiting rooms. She's stable, the doctor says, and those two words carry relief like oxygen after drowning. Severe pneumonia complicated by exhaustion, malnutrition, and an immune system that's been compromised by chronic stress and overwork. Another 6 to 8 hours without treatment, and we'd be having a very different conversation. The clinical assessment paints a picture Marcus understands instinctively, a woman who's been running on empty for so long she forgot what full felt like, who pushed herself past every warning sign because stopping meant not being able to pay rent or feed her son, who sacrificed her own survival for a child who needed her to keep breathing. "What's the prognosis?" Marcus asks, his voice steady despite the unfamiliar concern tightening his chest. "With proper treatment, full recovery," the doctor says, pulling a small notepad from her pocket. "But she'll need to stay here for at least 4 to 5 days for IV antibiotics and monitoring. After discharge, she cannot return to work for minimum 2 weeks, possibly 3 depending on how she responds. She'll need rest, proper nutrition, stress reduction, all things that are medically necessary but practically challenging for someone in her circumstances." The unspoken subtext hangs in the air between them, that medical advice doesn't account for rent coming due, for bills that don't pause while bodies heal, for children who need to eat every day regardless of their mother's ability to work. The math is simple and brutal, the kind that pushes people back to jobs before they're ready, that turns recoverable illnesses into chronic conditions or worse. She's asking for her son, the doctor continues, her gaze dropping to Daniel, who's beginning to stir against Marcus's chest. She's weak and disoriented, but she won't rest until she sees him. 5 minutes, no more. She needs sleep, and her body needs to focus on fighting infection, not managing anxiety about her child's whereabouts. Marcus nods, adjusting his hold on Daniel, who's waking slowly, small hands rubbing at eyes that are puffy from crying and exhaustion. "Hey," Marcus says softly, waiting for the boy to fully surface from sleep. "Your mom is awake. She wants to see you." Daniel's transformation is immediate and complete. Sleep. Clearing instantly, his whole body going rigid with hope that's almost painful to witness. "She's okay? She's really okay? I can see her?" "She's sick, but the doctors are helping her," Marcus explains, following the doctor down corridors that smell of disinfectant and human suffering. "She needs to rest, but she wants to make sure you're safe first. We can see her for a few minutes." They stop outside a room where machines hum with technological vigilance, monitors displaying vital signs that mean nothing to Daniel but tell Marcus more than he wants to know about how close Sophia came to dying. The doctor pushes open the door and Daniel practically leaps from Marcus's arms, running to the bed where his mother lies propped against pillows that seem to swallow her small frame. "Mama!" The cry breaks the room's clinical silence, and Marcus watches Sophia's eyes fly open, her arms reaching for her son with strength that shouldn't be possible given her condition. They come together with the kind of reunion that makes looking away feel necessary, but Marcus finds himself unable to turn from the sight of mother and son clinging to each other like drowning people who've found solid ground. "Baby, I'm so sorry," Sophia whispers, her voice hoarse from intubation and fever, but carrying weight that transcends the simple words. "I'm so sorry I scared you. I'm so sorry you had to handle this alone." "I wasn't alone," Daniel says, pulling back to look at his mother's face with desperate need for visual confirmation that she's actually here, actually breathing, actually staying. I found him, Mama. I found the man Mrs. Garcia told me about. The one who helps people. He brought you here. He saved you. Sophia's gaze finds Marcus standing in the doorway, and he sees confusion mixed with gratitude in her expression as she tries to reconcile the expensive suit with the desperate child who apparently approached him for help. Her eyes are the same deep brown as Daniel's, but carved with experiences that have aged her beyond 26 years, with knowledge about survival that most people never have to acquire. Thank you, she whispers, and the simple words carry weight that makes Marcus's throat tighten with emotions he has no framework for processing. I don't understand why you helped us, but thank you for bringing my son here. Thank you for making sure he was safe. Marcus steps closer, aware of the doctor hovering near the door and monitoring equipment that tracks every fluctuation in Sophia's vital signs. Daniel's very brave, he says, which feels inadequate but true. He knew you needed help and he found someone who could provide it. I tried to stay awake, Sophia says, tears spilling over her cheeks now. Exhaustion and fear and relief all mixed together into something too complex to untangle. I felt sick for days, but I couldn't miss shifts. I couldn't afford to lose any of my jobs. I took medicine and I kept working, and I thought I could push through it like I always do, but then I woke up here, and they told me I'd been unconscious for almost 12 hours. The guilt in her voice guts Marcus more effectively than any violence he's experienced. Here's a woman apologizing for being human, for having a body that can break under relentless pressure, for failing to maintain the impossible standard of never needing help that poverty demands from people who can't afford to be weak. You have nothing to apologize for, Marcus says, surprised by the intensity in his own voice. You got sick. It happens. What matters is, you're getting treatment now. But Daniel, Sophia protests, her hand tightening in her son's hair. He was alone all night. He could have been hurt. He could have... He's fine. Marcus interrupts gently. He's safe. And now we need to focus on making sure you get better so you can take care of him properly. The doctors say you'll need to stay here for several days, and then you'll need rest at home. He watches panic replace relief in Sophia's expression as implications sink in. Days in the hospital mean days without income, mean rent she can't pay, and bills accumulating while she lies helpless in this bed. The math is simple and devastating, visible in the way her face tightens, in how her breathing quickens despite the oxygen flowing through the cannula under her nose. I can't afford this, she whispers. I don't have insurance. The bills for even one day here will... She stops, the impossibility too large to articulate, drowning in numbers that will take years to pay off if they can be paid at all. Already handled, Marcus says, pulling out his phone and showing her the email confirmation from the hospital's billing department. All medical expenses covered. You focus on recovering. Everything else is taken care of. Sophia stares at the screen, then at him, confusion and suspicion warring with desperate hope in her expression. I can't accept that. I don't even know you. Why would you? Because your son asked me to help, Marcus says simply. Because he was brave enough to approach a stranger when his mother needed him to be. Because you deserve to heal without worrying about money. I don't take charity, Sophia says, and despite the weakness in her body, her voice carries steel that Marcus recognizes from his own mother, from women who've learned that accepting help always comes with strings attached, with prices that get paid in ways more costly than money. I work for what we have. I don't owe anyone anything I can't pay back. Marcus finds himself respecting that fierce independence, understanding the need for agency when circumstances strip away almost everything else. His mind works through the problem with the same strategic thinking he applies to business negotiations, looking for solutions that preserve dignity while addressing practical reality. I own several properties, he says slowly, the plan forming even as he speaks. Apartment buildings mostly, in neighborhoods, throughout the city. They all need management, someone to coordinate maintenance, handle tenant concerns, collect rent, deal with the daily logistics of keeping buildings running smoothly. It's legitimate work that pays well. When you're recovered, the job is yours if you want it. The offer is partially fabricated. He does own the properties, but they already have competent management. But Marcus can restructure operations easily enough, create a position that's real, rather than charity disguised as employment. He watches Sophia processing this, weighing pride against pragmatism, the need to provide for Daniel against the reality that she has no other options currently available. Why? She asks again, the question more complex than its single syllable suggests. Why help? Why now? Why them? What does he want in return? Because Daniel deserves a mother who's healthy enough to take care of him, Marcus says. Because you deserve work that doesn't kill you. Because maybe it's time someone got a break in this city instead of getting crushed by it. The doctor clears her throat from the doorway, professional intrusion into a moment that's become too intimate for the clinical setting. Ms. Reyes needs rest. Her body is fighting a serious infection and stress works against recovery. Daniel looks between his mother and Marcus, small face uncertain about what's happening, about whether this help is real or temporary, about whether tomorrow will bring more crisis or actual stability. Sophia's hand reaches for her son's face, cupping his cheek with tenderness that makes her weakness irrelevant compared to the fierce love she radiates. I'll take care of him, Marcus says, the promise emerging before conscious thought can examine its implications. Until you're released and recovered, Daniel stays with me. Safe, fed, whatever he needs. I don't even know your name, Sophia whispers, and Marcus hears the subtext, that she's entrusting her child to someone who remains essentially anonymous, despite having already proven himself in ways that defy logical assessment. Marcus Kane, he says, offering the name he uses in legitimate business contexts. And you have my word that nothing will happen to your son while he's in my care. The elevator ride to Marcus's penthouse feels surreal, Daniel's small hand wrapped in his as they ascend 42 floors above Chicago's downtown. The boy stares at the polished brass walls reflecting their images back at them. A child in duct-taped shoes and a man in a suit worth more than most people's monthly salary. Two lives that should never have intersected now bound together by crisis and promises made in hospital corridors. Is this where you live? Daniel asks when the doors open directly into Marcus's apartment, his voice small with awe as he takes in the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Lake Michigan's endless expanse. The minimalist furniture that costs more than it looks, the art on walls that's been selected by designers rather than personal preference. Yeah, Marcus says, seeing his home through the boy's eyes and recognizing how empty it feels, despite expensive everything. It's just me here. Too much space for one person, really. Daniel walks slowly into the living room, his sneakers silent on marble floors that have never known the sound of children's footsteps. He stops at the windows, pressing both hands against glass that's been cleaned to invisibility, looking down at the city spread out below like a living map of lights and movement. Mama would love this view, he whispers. She always says Chicago is beautiful if you look at it right. If you remember that all those lights are people living their lives and trying their best. The simple observation, delivered in a child's voice, strikes Marcus with unexpected force. He thinks about all the times he's stood at these windows without really seeing anything, without considering that each light represents a story, a struggle, lives being lived in the margins while he moved through the world insulated by money that solved problems before they became problems. His phone rings, Vincent's name appearing on the screen, and Marcus answers while watching Daniel explore the apartment with cautious wonder. Yeah? Volkov deal closed. Lawyers are satisfied. But we have a situation developing with the Castellano family. They're asking questions about your availability, making noises about whether personal distractions mean you're not reliable anymore. Vincent's voice carries concern beneath professional efficiency. Marcus feels irritation spike, the familiar patterns of his criminal enterprise demanding attention, while a 5-year-old explores a kitchen stocked with nothing a child would actually eat. Tell Castellano I'll meet with him tomorrow. Schedule it for 10 a.m. at the usual place. Anything else? Boss, what's going on? This isn't like you. Missing meetings, handling medical emergencies, bringing a kid to your place. People are starting to talk. They're wondering if you're compromised, if someone's using leverage against you. The concern is valid, earned through years of navigating a world where weakness invites exploitation, where any deviation from established patterns creates vulnerabilities that rivals can exploit. But Marcus finds himself unable to explain decisions he doesn't fully understand himself, unable to articulate why a desperate child's grip on his wrist has rearranged every priority he's held for 15 years. I'm handling it, he says, his voice carrying the edge that usually ends discussions. The business runs fine. Nothing's compromised except my schedule for a few days. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. He ends the call before Vincent can respond, silencing his phone completely because the world outside these windows suddenly feels less urgent than the child standing in his kitchen asking if there's anything to eat besides protein. Shakes and expensive coffee. The next few hours become an exercise in improvisation Marcus has never needed before. He orders groceries through a service he's never used, describing Daniel's size to personal shoppers who probably wonder why a man living in Chicago's most expensive building suddenly needs children's clothing delivered urgently. He makes pasta with Daniel's help, the process chaotic and messy in ways that would have been unthinkable in his usual controlled existence, and finds himself laughing when the boy insists on adding more cheese. More cheese to sauce that's already drowning in dairy products. They eat at the dining table Marcus purchased for appearances but rarely uses, and he discovers that shared meals taste different when consumed with someone whose presence demands engagement rather than the solitary efficiency he's perfected. Daniel tells him about school and his best friend, who moved away last month. About how his mama sings songs about stars before bedtime, each detail building a picture of lives lived in the margins while people like Marcus moved through the world insulated from such struggles. Do you have a family? Daniel asks, tilting his head with the directness only children can manage. Like a wife? Or kids? Or people who live with you? The question shouldn't hurt, but it does, exposing the emptiness Marcus has cultivated as both aesthetic and lifestyle choice. No, he says simply. It's just me. Has been for a long time. That sounds lonely, Daniel observes, and the matter-of-fact assessment from a 5-year-old guts Marcus more effectively than any violence he's experienced. Mama says nobody should be alone all the time. She says people need people even when it's hard. The simple philosophy, delivered without judgment, settles over Marcus like a weight he didn't know he'd been carrying. He thinks about years spent building walls between himself and anything resembling vulnerability, about convincing himself that solitude equals strength, rather than just elaborate ways to avoid admitting that isolation hurts. Bath time becomes another improvisation, the guest bathroom transforming into a small flood zone, while Daniel splashes with joy that seems miraculous, given everything he's endured in the past 24 hours. Marcus kneels on tile that costs more per square foot than most people's rent, soaking wet, and finds himself understanding that some kinds of chaos are worth the mess they create. He tucks Daniel into the guest bed that's never held actual guests, because Marcus doesn't do hospitality or connection, or anything resembling normal human relationships. The boy looks impossibly small against the expensive linens, his face carrying exhaustion that goes beyond one difficult day, reflecting years of carrying worry that children shouldn't have to hold. Will Mama really be okay? Daniel asks, his voice small with the fear he's been holding back through everything else. Promise she won't disappear, like Dad did? The question twists something in Marcus's chest. Recognition of abandonment anxiety that forms in children who've learned that adults can't always be relied upon to stay. He sits on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on Daniel's small shoulder with gentleness that surprises them both. Your mama is strong, Marcus says. She's going to fight to get better because she loves you more than anything in the world. I saw it in her eyes at the hospital. You're her reason for everything. She's not going anywhere. And you, Daniel whispers, his brown eyes searching Marcus's face with desperate need for reassurance. Are you going to disappear once Mama gets better? Once we don't need help anymore? The question strikes like a physical blow, forcing Marcus to confront implications of promises he's made without thinking through their long-term consequences. He looks at this child who's somehow dismantled every defense he's spent years constructing, who's made him feel things he'd convinced himself he was incapable of feeling, and realizes that walking away after Sophia's recovery feels as impossible as sprouting wings and flying from the penthouse's windows. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus says, and means it with intensity that terrifies him. Not unless you and your mama want me to. Daniel's arms wrap around his neck suddenly, the embrace catching Marcus completely unprepared. Thank you for finding us, the boy whispers against his shoulder. Thank you for being the kind of person who helps instead of ignoring people like everyone else does. Marcus holds him carefully, feeling the fragility of small bones and the weight of trust that's been placed in hands more accustomed to violence than tenderness. Something fundamental shifts in his chest, recognition that he's been moving through life as though emotions were weaknesses to be excised rather than essential components of being fully human. He stays until Daniel falls asleep, watching the boy's breathing even out into the surrender of exhaustion, then retreats to his bedroom where sleep feels impossible despite his body's demands. His mind replays moments from the past 12 hours like a film he can't stop watching. Daniel's desperate grip on his wrist, Sophia's gratitude mixed with confusion, the weight of a child trusting him with complete faith, despite having every reason to fear strangers. The next morning arrives too early, dawn light streaming through windows that face east over the lake. Marcus wakes to find Daniel standing beside his bed, staring at him with the intensity only 5-year-olds can manage, and he feels his lips twitch towards something resembling a smile, despite the complicated emotions churning in his chest. Can we see Mama today? Daniel asks, his voice carrying hope that's been rebuilt overnight through the resilience children possess. They visit the hospital after breakfast, Daniel clutching a drawing he's made using supplies Marcus ordered along with everything else. The picture shows 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sun that blazes with crayon enthusiasm, a family that exists only in a child's imagination, but somehow feels more real than anything Marcus has built through years of criminal enterprise. Sophia sits propped against pillows when they arrive, color returning to her cheeks, strength evident in movements that had been trembling weakness the day before. She holds Daniel for long minutes, breathing in her son's scent like it's oxygen more essential than what flows through the cannula beneath her nose, and when she looks up at Marcus, her eyes carry questions that demand answers he's not sure how to provide. How long can you keep him? Sophia asks when Daniel becomes absorbed in showing her the penthouse's view through photos on Marcus's phone. Her voice is low with the kind of desperation that comes from understanding the precariousness of her situation. Medical bills already accumulating at rates that will bankrupt someone who'd been barely surviving before this crisis. Her job's likely gone after days of unexplained absence, rent coming due with no money to cover it. As long as necessary, Marcus says, watching shock replace resignation in Sophia's expression. I meant what I said about the job. property management position, competitive salary, benefits that include health insurance. It's real work with real responsibilities. You recover, you take the position, and you and Daniel have stability instead of surviving crisis to crisis. I don't understand why you're doing this, Sophia says, and he hears vulnerability beneath the words, the fear of trusting kindness that might be manipulation disguised as generosity. Men like you don't help people like us without wanting something in return. So what is it? What's the price for all this help? The question hangs in the air between them, and Marcus recognizes its validity. That his world operates on transactions and leverage, that nothing comes free in the criminal ecosystem he navigates. But looking at Sophia's face, at the fierce protectiveness mixed with desperate hope in her expression, he finds himself wanting to be different than his reputation suggests. No price, he says simply. Maybe I'm tired of being the kind of person who only knows how to take. Maybe your son reminded me that there used to be a version of myself who understood about helping people who need it. Maybe I just want to do something decent for once, without calculating what I get in return. The confession feels dangerous, exposing vulnerabilities he usually keeps hidden beneath expensive suits and controlled violence. But Sophia's gaze softens slightly, some of the suspicion easing even as wariness remains. Years of surviving on her own having taught her that trust has to be earned through consistent action rather than pretty words. Over the next 4 days, a pattern develops that reshapes Marcus's existence in ways he stops trying to resist. Mornings begin with Daniel bouncing into his bedroom at dawn, full of energy and questions that demand engagement. They eat breakfast together while discussing everything from dinosaurs to why the sky is blue, conversations that require Marcus to admit ignorance more frequently than he's comfortable with, but which feel strangely satisfying in their simplicity. He conducts business from home when possible, taking calls and video conferences while Daniel colors at the dining table, the boys' presence somehow making negotiations feel less important than they used to, putting criminal enterprise in perspective against the reality of a child who needs consistency more than he needs another criminal deal, structured through legitimate facades. They visit Sophia every afternoon, Daniel running to his mother's arms with the kind of joy that never diminishes despite daily repetition, and Marcus finds himself staying longer than necessary, drawn into conversations that range from Daniel's adjustment to life in the penthouse to Sophia's memories of better times before poverty and single motherhood became her defining characteristics. She tells him about growing up in Pilsen, about parents who worked 3 jobs between them and still couldn't quite make ends meet, about her father's death when she was 16, and her mother's slow decline after, about getting pregnant at 21 by a man who disappeared the moment responsibility became real instead of theoretical. She shares these stories without self-pity, presenting them as simple facts that shaped her rather than defining her, and Marcus finds himself respecting the strength it takes to survive what would have broken weaker people. He shares less, his own history too tangled with criminal activity to reveal safely, but he offers pieces. The Bridgeport childhood he usually doesn't discuss, his mother's death when he was 19, the years in foster care before that, which taught him to trust no one and depend on nothing except his own capacity for violence and strategic thinking. Sophia listens with the kind of attention that suggests she understands the gaps in his narrative speak louder than the details he provides. Something develops between them during those hospital visits, something that transcends gratitude or obligation or the practical arrangements binding them together. Marcus finds himself noticing details he shouldn't. The way Sophia's laugh sounds like music he's been missing without knowing it existed. How her eyes light up when she talks about her dreams for Daniel's future. The strength in her hands despite their calluses and scars from years of physical labor. He catches her watching him sometimes when she thinks he's distracted. Her expression carrying curiosity mixed with something that might be attraction or might be the complicated emotions that develop when someone saves your life and takes care of your child. The awareness sits between them like electricity, neither acknowledging it directly, but both feeling its presence intensifying with each passing day. The discharge day arrives with autumn rain falling steady and cold, Chicago's weather shifting from summer heat to fall chill with the abruptness typical of the Midwest. Marcus arrives with clothes he's had delivered for Sophia. Not expensive designer pieces that would make her uncomfortable, but quality basics that fit properly and make her look less like someone recovering from near death and more like the beautiful young woman she is beneath the exhaustion. She emerges from the bathroom dressed in dark jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that reveals the delicate structure of her face, and Marcus feels something catch in his chest that has nothing to do with protective instincts and everything to do with attraction. He hasn't allowed himself to acknowledge until this moment. "Ready?" he asks, his voice coming out rougher than intended, and Sophia nods while Daniel bounces with excitement about taking his mama home. Except home is no longer the studio apartment on 18th Street, but Marcus's penthouse that's been transformed by a child's presence into something resembling actual living space, rather than expensive emptiness. The drive back takes them through neighborhoods where Sophia's story plays out in countless variations. Working people grinding through multiple jobs, children playing in spaces too small for proper childhood, the constant struggle to survive in a city that grows more expensive while wages stay stagnant. Marcus sees it differently now, through eyes that have been opened by personal connection to one woman and one boy who represent millions living this reality. The penthouse feels different when they arrive together, all three of them crossing the threshold into space that Marcus has unconsciously begun thinking of as theirs rather than his. Daniel runs ahead to show his mother the room that's become his, the toys and books and comfort that's accumulated over 4 days of Marcus trying to provide stability the boys never had consistently. Sophia stands in the living room looking overwhelmed, her hands twisting together with nervous energy that suggests she's struggling to accept how completely her life has changed. "This is too much," she whispers. The penthouse, the medical bills, the job offer, Daniel being here, it's too much generosity from someone I barely know. There has to be limits to charity. "It's not charity," Marcus says, crossing to stand in front of her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, to smell the hospital soap on her skin mixed with something uniquely her. "And you're wrong about barely knowing me. You know I showed up when your son needed help. You know I kept him safe while you were unconscious. You know I'm offering you a legitimate path to stability instead of the grinding poverty that nearly killed you. That's not nothing." "But why?" Sophia asks again, and this time the question carries different weight, acknowledging that his motivations matter more than she wants to admit. "Why us? Why now? What is it about a desperate kid grabbing your wrist that made you care when you could have walked away?" Marcus doesn't have a good answer, or none that makes sense even to himself. He thinks about the copper taste of blood from a poker game that turned violent, about moving through Chicago's criminal underworld like a ghost who'd forgotten how to be human, about the emptiness he'd been carrying without recognizing it as emptiness, until Daniel's small hand wrapped around his wrist and somehow anchored him to something real. "Maybe I needed saving as much as you did," he says finally, the confession feeling like removing armor. "Maybe I'd been surviving instead of living for so long I forgot the difference. Maybe your son reminded me that there's supposed to be more to existence than accumulating power and money while convincing yourself that's enough." Sophia's eyes fill with tears she doesn't let fall, her hand reaching up to touch his face with fingers that tremble slightly. "You're a good man pretending to be something else," she whispers. "I don't know what you do for work that pays for all this, but I know goodness when I see it. Daniel's alive because of you. I'm alive because of you. That's not nothing either." The kiss happens without conscious decision, Marcus closing the distance between them before rational thought can intervene, with all the reasons why complicating their situation with romance is catastrophically stupid. Sophia's lips are soft against his, her small gasp of surprise melting into response that suggests she's been fighting the same attraction he has, that the connection developing between them transcends practical foundations. When they separate, both breathless, Marcus sees his own confusion and desire reflected in her expression. This changes things, Sophia says, her hand still resting on his chest where she can probably feel his heart hammering. It does, Marcus agrees, his thumb tracing her jawline with gentleness that contradicts the violence these same hands have inflicted in service of Chicago's criminal families. But I don't want to pretend there's nothing between us when clearly there is. I don't know how to navigate this, but I want to try if you're willing to accept complications that come with my life. What complications? Sophia asks, and Marcus hears the real question beneath. What exactly does he do that affords penthouses and the ability to cover medical bills without blinking? What darkness is he involved in that might endanger her and Daniel if they stay? He makes a decision in that moment, one that violates every rule he's established about keeping his two lives separate. I work in real estate development legitimately, he begins carefully, but I also facilitate certain operations for families who control Chicago's port activities and shipping interests. I don't hurt innocents, don't deal in things that harm children, but I exist in spaces where violence is sometimes necessary to maintain order in a world that operates outside legal frameworks. The confession hangs between them, and he watches Sophia process this information, watches her weighing truth against the help he's provided, calculating whether the danger he represents outweighs the stability he's offering. Her intelligence shows in the way she thinks it through carefully, rather than reacting with immediate fear or judgment. How dangerous? She asks finally. For Daniel, specifically. How much risk are we taking by staying here? There's always some risk in my world, Marcus admits, appreciating that she's asking practical questions rather than moral ones. But I can provide security that keeps you safer than you've ever been. Guards, surveillance, resources that make you untouchable as long as you're under my protection. The job I'm offering is legitimate. Managing properties I actually own through legal companies. You wouldn't be involved in anything questionable. Sophia nods slowly, acceptance forming despite the complications he's revealed. I trust you, she says, and the simple statement carries more weight than any contract he's ever signed. Not because I'm naive or desperate, though maybe I'm both, but because your actions toward Daniel and me have been consistently protective and generous when you could have walked away a dozen times. Whatever darkness you're involved in, I don't think it defines who you actually are. The faith she places in him feels simultaneously like a gift and a burden, like responsibility he's not sure he deserves, but will fight to earn. He pulls her close, needing to feel her solid reality against him, proof that this isn't temporary insanity but something real, developing between people who shouldn't work together on paper, but somehow do in practice. Weeks blur into months, autumn transitioning to winter while Marcus's life reorganizes itself around two people who've become essential to his existence. Daniel starts school at a private academy where security is tight but invisible, his dark hair bouncing as he runs to greet Marcus each afternoon with stories about friends and learning that fill the penthouse with joy he'd never imagined his life could contain. Sophia takes the property management position once she's fully recovered, her competence transforming operations in ways that validate what had begun as convenient fiction, but revealed itself as legitimate business decision. She's brilliant at handling tenant concerns and coordinating maintenance, at seeing problems before they become crises, at managing people with firm kindness that earns respect, rather than demanding it through intimidation. She insists on paying rent despite his protests, establishing independence even while living in his space, And Marcus learns not to fight her need for agency because he recognizes it as the same fierce self-reliance that kept her surviving when most people would have surrendered. They find rhythm that works, sharing meals and responsibilities, navigating the complicated dance of becoming a family without formal definition of what they are to each other. The criminal enterprise continues running with minimal input, Marcus having restructured operations to emphasize legitimate businesses over the activities that could endanger Sophia and Daniel. He still facilitates port operations and maintains relationships with the families who've relied on his services, but he's more selective now, declining opportunities that would require the kind of attention that takes him away from home for extended periods. His associates notice the changes with curiosity that graduates toward suspicion, questions about his availability becoming pointed enough that Marcus recognizes the need to address speculation before it evolves into problems he can't control. He calls a meeting with his key lieutenants, gathering them in the private room at the restaurant he owns in River North, where business has been conducted for years before any of them were born. "I know you've all noticed changes in my schedule," Marcus says without preamble, his voice carrying authority that makes the 5 men around the table lean forward attentively. "I'm transitioning some responsibilities to focus on other priorities. The business continues running profitably. Nothing's compromised except my personal time, which I'm choosing to allocate differently." "The woman and kid?" Vincent asks, having earned the right to direct questions through years of loyal service. "They're permanent fixtures now? Not temporary situation that resolves itself?" "Permanent," Marcus confirms, watching reactions ripple around the table. Surprise, calculation, concern about vulnerabilities that families could exploit. "Which means they're under protection, same as any other asset I value. Anyone who threatens them answers to me directly." The statement carries implications his lieutenants understand instinctively, that Sophia and Daniel have become sacred, untouchable, protected by the full weight of Marcus's reputation and resources. It's a declaration that reshapes how his organization operates, that introduces human elements into calculations that used to be purely strategic. "Does she know?" Vincent asks carefully. "About what you actually do? About why people respect the Kane name in certain circles?" "She knows enough," Marcus says. "She's made her choice with full information about complications that come with being connected to me. What matters now is ensuring that choice doesn't come back to haunt any of us." The meeting continues with logistics and adjustments, restructuring operations to accommodate Marcus's reduced availability while maintaining the profitable efficiency that keeps families dependent on his services. By the time it concludes, everyone understands the new reality, that Marcus Kane has become someone different than the ghost who'd moved through Chicago's underworld with single-minded focus on accumulating power. Christmas approaches with commercial inevitability, and Marcus finds himself making decisions that surprise him, approving a massive tree for the living room, authorizing purchases of decorations that have never been necessary before, even taking Daniel to choose gifts with the kind of paternal engagement he'd never imagined himself capable of providing. They decorate together on a Saturday afternoon, all 3 of them, and Marcus discovers that some kinds of chaos are worth the mess they create. Sophia's laugh fills the penthouse with warmth that has nothing to do with the building's heating system, and Daniel's excitement about hanging ornaments transforms expensive space into something resembling an actual home. That night, after Daniel falls asleep surrounded by new toys and the pleasant exhaustion of being celebrated, Marcus finds Sophia on the balcony watching snow fall over the city. She's wrapped in a blanket against the cold, her breath forming clouds in air that bites with winter's teeth, and he comes to stand beside her with the bottle of wine they'd opened earlier. "Thank you," she says quietly, accepting the glass he pours. "For today, for everything, for giving Daniel a Christmas he'll remember for the rest of his life, for giving me a reason to believe that things can actually get better instead of just surviving the next crisis." "You did that yourself," Marcus says, his arms sliding around her waist. You kept fighting when most people would have given up. You raised a son brave enough to ask strangers for help when his mother needed him to be. I just provided resources. The strength was always yours. Sophia turns in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that carry emotions she hasn't voiced but he can see clearly. Love mixing with gratitude, desire entangled with trust, the complicated feelings that develop when someone saves your life and then becomes essential to your continued existence. I love you, she whispers. I know it's fast and complicated and probably not smart given everything, but I love you anyway. The words strike like lightning, illuminating spaces in Marcus's heart he'd convinced himself didn't exist anymore. He kisses her with intensity, born of feelings he's been holding back, pulling her close against the cold while snow falls around them like blessing on something too improbable to be anything but fate. I love you too, he says when they break apart, breathless. You and Daniel, you're everything I didn't know I needed. You're the reason I get up in the morning instead of just going through motions. You're home in ways this penthouse never was before you filled it with life. They stand together watching the city while snow accumulates on the balcony railing, and Marcus feels peace that's eluded him his entire adult life. The criminal empire still exists, still demands attention occasionally, but it no longer defines him completely. He's become someone else during these months, someone capable of love and gentleness, of putting other people's needs before his own calculation of advantage. 6 months after that first desperate encounter, Marcus makes another decision that surprises everyone, including himself. He proposes on an ordinary Tuesday evening, no elaborate setup or romantic gestures, just the three of them having dinner when he pulls out the ring he's been carrying for weeks, unable to find the perfect moment because he's finally learned that perfect moments are constructed from ordinary ones. Marry me, he says to Sophia, while Daniel watches with eyes that shine with hope. Both of you, officially become my family. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how completely you're loved. Sophia's tears spill over immediately, her yes coming through sobs that make Daniel concerned until they explain happy crying, and suddenly the boy is part of the embrace, small arms wrapping around both of them with fierce happiness. The ring slides onto her finger with ease that feels like confirmation, metal warming to her skin, and Marcus feels gratitude for the moment a desperate child grabbed his wrist and somehow saved them all. The wedding happens 3 months later in a private ceremony at a garden venue outside the city. Small gathering of people who've become family through choice rather than blood. Daniel serves as ring bearer with seriousness that makes guests smile, and when Marcus watches Sophia walk toward him in a simple white dress, he feels his throat tighten with emotions he no longer tries to suppress or hide. They exchange vows that acknowledge the improbability of their story, the collision that brought them together, the choice they're making to build something permanent from circumstances that could have been temporary. Marcus promises to protect and cherish, to be the kind of man who deserves the faith Sophia places in him, to give Daniel the stability and love every child deserves. Sophia promises to stand beside him through complications his life will inevitably create, to trust his capacity for goodness despite the darkness he sometimes operates in, to build a home with him that's defined by love rather than the expensive emptiness he'd been living in before they crashed into his world. The years that follow bring ordinary challenges and extraordinary joy in equal measure. Daniel grows into a thoughtful teenager who shows his mother's fierce intelligence and his adopted father's strategic thinking, navigating the private school world with ease while maintaining humility about privilege he understands others don't share. They add another child to their family 2 years after the wedding. A daughter Sophia names Grace because she says, that's what their entire story has been about. Undeserved grace that transformed lives through a child's desperate courage and a stranger's choice to help instead of ignore. Marcus continues working legitimate businesses while maintaining minimal involvement in the criminal operations that still exist in Chicago's shadows. He uses his influence differently now, directing resources toward community programs in neighborhoods like the one Sophia escaped from, creating opportunities for people who need breaks, instead of just grinding them down through systems designed to keep them struggling. The studio apartment on 18th Street becomes memory rather than threat, replaced by security that comes from actual stability rather than just surviving crisis to crisis. Sophia manages a portfolio of properties that grows as Marcus invests in developments that serve communities rather than just extracting wealth from them, and she transforms the work into something meaningful beyond profit margins. On quiet evenings when the children are asleep and Chicago's lights paint patterns across their bedroom ceiling, Marcus and Sophia talk about the improbability of their story, about how a desperate morning encounter became the foundation for a family that shouldn't exist, but somehow does. They marvel at the transformation one moment of choosing compassion over convenience created, at how different all their lives would be if he'd walked past Daniel that afternoon instead of stopping to listen. "Thank you for being someone who helps instead of ignores," Sophia whispers against his chest, echoing her son's words from years before. "Thank you for teaching us that we deserve love and stability, and all the things poverty convinced us were for other people." "Thank you for letting me be someone better than I was," Marcus responds, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for showing me that strength comes in forms I'd never recognized, in vulnerability offered and accepted, in building instead of just protecting, in opening doors I'd convinced myself needed to stay locked." The story ends where it began, with a choice made in a moment when walking away would have been easier, but staying changed everything. Marcus Kane, who'd spent years moving through Chicago's criminal underworld like a ghost who'd forgotten how to be human, found salvation through a desperate child's courage and became someone his mother would recognize. Someone who understands that real power lies not in controlling others, but in choosing to help when help is needed most. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.